Hi everyone and welcome to the Genomics Show. I'm Maria Nadestad. Today I'm answering a bunch of questions that I received from various viewers of the show about going into industry from academia. Lots of questions about how to get the jobs and so on, so if that's something that interests you, stick around. And thanks to the few people who wrote me with questions. So let's get into it. All right, so question number 1. What is the best way for people who have spent so much time in academia to switch to industry? I'm struggling with that first step. With lots of accumulated but sporadic skills, I'm not sure how to talk to hiring managers and where to enter industry, startup, big company, etc. Okay, so I would say start by looking for companies that relate to your areas of research, which is presumably where you have the most skills and knowledge to offer. And think about any companies whose products you might have used in your research already, that you have some experience and expertise with already. You can also check with your network or chat with people during conferences. Even virtual conferences have some social time where you might be able to ask some industry people about their work. And that can just give you an initial list of companies to start applying to. One thing I'll note here is that industry isn't really a completely different world. Your published papers largely still count and will help you get jobs, although now other things like your coding abilities and other skills can also help land you that job, which it might help less with if you're going for an academic career, right? Like, you're not going to become a professor just because you wrote a lot of great technical blog posts, but that could definitely help you get a job in industry. Major overgeneralization, but there you go. Question 2. My PhD training, coursework, department, and lab were all wet lab based. Without coursework or certifications in bioinformatics, how can I make a compelling case of my experience using bioinformatics? Are publications or letters of recommendation from collaborators sufficient for industry positions? Okay, so several things on this one. First, showing your expertise in bioinformatics can be done through papers, but I also highly recommend making sure that evidence of your code are easy to find on GitHub and preferably linked to and from the papers the code was used for. Very important. If I can't find your code, I assume that there was no bioinformatics component that you did in the papers, and it should be like on your GitHub or at least like linked from your GitHub. So yeah, that should be easy to find. Okay, so you also mentioned letters of recommendation. We don't do that here. Outside academia, you're really not going to submit letters of recommendation with your job application. At least I've never seen it. You can add references, which is just people who would talk highly of you, and just add their contact information. That's what a job application might ask for. But these are not often actually contacted, and when they are, it's usually as more of like a background check later in the process to make sure that, you know, you're not terrible to work with or something before they give you a final offer. And even then, they don't always ask for it. So they treat it a little bit more like a background check, and it's not something that they would use to help make you look better at the resume stage. If your resume and your GitHub/online presence doesn't speak for you enough, that's a big problem. You're not getting past the resume stage unless you look pretty compelling at that point. Recommendations can't really help you. Your online presence and resume have to speak for themselves. Okay. So the much better thing you can do is make sure that your resume and online presence both clearly show off your work and skills. If most of your papers don't sound super bioinformatics-y from the abstract, then make doubly sure that your GitHub is full of code from the papers and linked prominently from your resume. There should be links to GitHub from your resume. I'll usually put it at the top, but also link to it from the individual coding projects that you have that have code associated. Unless they're like web apps, in which case you could just link straight to the web apps or something wherever they're available. But if there's code associated with the paper, then link to it so that it's easy for us as people who are looking at job applications a lot. It's easy for us to find evidence of your code because that's usually a pretty quick way to filter, I find. So if you don't have that, then it's really hard to get you past the resume stage. Okay, so related to that, Google yourself. Even if your name is not unique, like your name is Adam Smith or something, adding a keyword like bioinformatics or genome should make you show up uniquely with multiple search results that all scream, this person has done various cool bioinformatics stuff, and they can code. One way to populate those search results and help other people is to teach some of what you know online, like by writing a blog or Medium post. Since you're currently watching me on YouTube, though, I feel compelled to clarify that I don't recommend you bother making YouTube videos for the purpose of showing your expertise. And that's because a blog post is 20% as much work as a YouTube video, but it proves your expertise just as well. But also a fun fact. Someone literally just emailed me about my previous video, Genes and Geography, asking if I was interested in applying for a job with them. So this does work. Teaching online does work. It can get you employers' attention even when you're, not actually looking for a job. But getting this kind of attention flowing in can be helpful if you are looking for a job, and so it's a great way to get yourself noticed. Papers work too, of course, but they take way more effort than some technical blog posts, and you probably don't have time to make a few extra papers from scratch just for the job search, just to make yourself stand out last minute, while you do have time to write a few technical blog posts as a fun break from filling in all the job applications, right? Yeah, you have time for that. And I do believe that it's very much worth it. Again, if you Google yourself, like if I can't find you online, then I only have to go off your resume, and I don't really trust what people write on their resumes. If I can't find your code, if I can't find some other evidence of you existing and knowing your stuff on the internet, then it's much harder. Whereas if I look up someone and as soon as I Google them, I find all sorts of cool stuff they've done, I'm like, oh great, this person knows what they're doing and they're good at communicating about bioinformatics and about the code that they write and stuff. Question 3. Would most industry/biotech positions be open to training additional skills early on? An example would be that many positions ask for SQL, or I like to pronounce this SQL, experience, in addition to R and Python, but SQL is not frequently used in small academic labs. Is it reasonable to share a personal project using SQL and asking for additional early training in this area? So I love this question because it lets me clarify a lot of good things. Number one, I wouldn't take all the skills listed in a job description too seriously. Hitting some of the programming languages and scientific expertise is often enough. And if they're so strict about SQL specifically that they don't hire you just because you lack that skill, that would be silly. And like you said, most academics haven't used SQL, so the employer would quickly adjust their standards, would have to. And usually they won't even bother changing the job description. They'll just kind of gradually lower their standards as they fail to find people who meet them. And so you should always apply to these jobs even if you don't feel like you meet all the qualifications, as long as you feel like you could learn them on the job. And that's the important part. So when you say whether they would train you in those additional skills, not usually. And you probably shouldn't bother asking them whether they're okay with you not knowing SQL. If it's not on your resume, they'll assume that you don't know it, but they'll also assume you can learn it. See, we assume that the people we hire learn the skills they need on the job themselves once the need arises. Teaching yourself anything needed for a project should be something you're used to by the time you finish a PhD, so you'll be fine. Again, we don't do a whole lot of oh, this person doesn't know SQL. Let me set them up with a SQL teacher or give them a training course. No, we just throw you in the deep end and expect that you teach yourself and look up what you need in order to make it work. I mean, isn't that how you got here in the first place? Like, isn't that how you did your entire PhD project? Yeah, so you should be able to figure these things out yourself. And if you can't, that's a different problem. You should absolutely just be able to go figure it out. You also asked if it's reasonable to share a personal project using SQL. Sure. You don't really need to. Like, if you're really worried that you're not going to get jobs just because the SQL is missing, then sure, by all means, like, make a little personal project or do a little, like, technical blog post or something around using SQL for bioinformatics and finding out, like, where it would be useful. And that could be like an interesting, teaching type of post anyway. But yeah, usually I wouldn't worry too much. SQL is not a skill that you will be stuck for months needing to teach yourself. Like, if you can't code at all, that's a problem. But, tacking on one more language, especially a specialty language like SQL, I believe that you can just figure that out on the fly. Question number 4. Biologists often recommend academic postdocs, even for those moving into industry. Is this also recommended for bioinformatics? I would say definitely not. Definitely not necessary to do a postdoc for bioinformatics before you go into industry. Sometimes it's not even necessary if you want to be tenure track faculty. Sometimes, like, there have been people who go straight from their PhD to become faculty, but that's a whole different story and and I don't know, like, the academic path is not mine, so I won't speak to it too much. But anyway, in industry, definitely not a requirement. For biologists, I could see how the job market might simply be more crowded with candidates, and a postdoc might be needed to stand out if you're a biologist. Do know that there are industry postdocs too, so that's something to check out. Just a little note to the biologists here. But for bioinformatics, if you are having trouble getting jobs, a postdoc is not usually like the way that you would fix that, right? If following my earlier advice about making sure that your coding output is visible on GitHub, publishing some technical blog posts just to kind of prove your bioinformatics expertise, if all those things haven't worked, then you're probably better off just doing a data science boot camp or something else to kind of get your skills there rather than doing a postdoc. Although I will say that a short, like, 1-year postdoc with a really great lab working on a project that you're really interested in, like the research is just super interesting to you, you get to work with some of the leaders in a major effort that you find just really, that you're passionate about, that can still be a good decision. I'm not saying that you absolutely can't do a postdoc. Just because you plan to go into industry. I'm just saying it's not the fastest way to get a good job in industry, right? But can't rule it out completely. Your research interests still matter. Question number 5. Are remote work positions common for early career bioinformaticians and data scientists? They're probably more common now that we've all experienced remote work due to COVID, blah, blah, blah. You've seen this a million times. Before COVID, it was not something I had seen often, although this varies greatly company to company. It was more common, though, for slightly more senior people who initially worked at a main office and then, over the years, moved away due to personal reasons, and the company cared about keeping them. So they were good, they were useful to the company, and so the company wants to keep them enough to allow remote work, even if that's not something that the company explicitly allows and would, in many cases, not even consider for new hires, at least like this was pre-pandemic. Okay, so We don't know how this will shake out after the pandemic, if there even is an after, but I'm guessing that you can probably find some companies willing to let you start remotely, even if this is in a couple of years when the pandemic is at least theoretically over completely. We'll see what happens. That being said, I would say that I would generally encourage you to at least start your career by going into the first company you work for in person, when that's safe after pandemic, of course. This is because it can be more enjoyable and easier to make friends at work, and it makes your job more than just work, so to speak. This is ultimately a personal decision, but I just wanted to let you know that working in person in industry can be more fun than in academia, depending on the circumstances, right? For instance, your company might have free food, and your coworkers might be much less stressed and more happy to chat and more, happy than your lab mates were in academia. This is possible, depending on the lab, depending on the company. There might be just a little less stress in industry. And so it could be more pleasant for you to physically be in the office, hanging out with the coworkers over the free food and so on. So it might be worth giving in person a real chance. So I had some technical issues, so if the video looks a little different now, it's because I'm no longer doing it from my phone, but instead from the computer. Question 6. What are reasonable salary expectations for early career positions with a PhD? The range is so different from academia and from biologists or software devs on the other end, which we have talked about in videos before. So this is a hard one. You'll almost always make more in industry than by doing a postdoc, and you might even make more in industry than if you manage to get a faculty position immediately. So I can't speak for biology positions in industry, of course, but for bioinformatics positions specifically, I'd say it's somewhere on the order of $100,000 a year. That's a reasonable enough salary expectation, assuming this is in a large city like the Bay Area, New York, or Boston. And I'd say that elsewhere, including in much of the rest of the world outside the US, it is likely a little lower. And the more your job resembles software engineering, the higher you might be able to push it, but it's all very hard to tell. And you basically can consult Glassdoor to figure out a little bit more about the salaries in your area and for specific companies that you're thinking about applying to and specific roles within those companies. It gets very detailed, but always remember that the only real way to determine what you're going to get paid is to actually apply for the job and get a job offer from the company. So sometimes you have to apply to several jobs in order to find good ones, in order to get some of them. And it is great if you can have more than one job offer arriving within a window of time where you can negotiate both at once and make a decision that isn't just, do I want to take the one offer I have, or do I want to decline it and wait for other companies, because that's kind of a scary thing to do. So it's good to kind of try to get multiple companies lined up at the same point in the interview process at once, and this can be really difficult. And it's a lot of work. So good luck. Question 7. In what ways would you recommend searching for jobs? Without conferences due to COVID, is LinkedIn enough, or should I be seeking out positions through other avenues? And how valuable are recruiters for this process? So you can apply for jobs online, which should work reasonably well on its own if your online profile and resume are impressive enough. I tried to think through some general rules for when you need to use your network and when you don't, but it's hard to summarize and it's hard to draw generalizations, right? So let me instead tell you a few anonymized stories about actual people that I have seen get jobs. So person 1 applied to lots of jobs and also contacted folks in their network. None of the network contacts really ended up helping because they didn't happen to have jobs at the companies that were a good fit. And the online job applications actually ended up working just fine on their own at companies that there were no networking contacts to, which yielded several good leads, including the job that this person ended up taking. On the other hand, person 2 applied to a job online at a company that nicely matched their PhD expertise, but they got ignored. And then later, they were at a conference and chatted with someone at the company's booth, had a good conversation. The person was like, oh, have you thought about applying? And so they ended up applying through this new contact, and that helped kind of get them noticed and pushed along, and they actually ended up getting the job. Person 3 presented their work at a conference, which someone from industry came up to them to discuss afterwards. The two of them bumped into each other again later at another conference, and the person got invited to stop by the company to give a talk. Later, when this person was looking for a job, which they weren't originally, they asked the contact if there might be a fit at the company. And there was, and they ended up getting the job. Some of these real stories do involve conferences. They could also theoretically have happened virtually. There is sometimes some networking, but I want to highlight that it was always the work the person had done, the PhD expertise, the great presentations they had given, and just like generally having a good profile that landed them the job. Reaching out to people can be helpful though. So, like person number 2, if you apply for a job that you think you're really nicely qualified for, and it's a great match, your PhD project aligns well with it, and you feel like they might have ignored you by accident, then it is totally fine to reach out to that company. It doesn't have to be when you're at a conference that just happened to be for this person, but you can just reach out to someone from the company that, you know, is on the right team or who might be or know the hiring manager. You can kind of try to guess and just say, hey, I applied, but I didn't hear anything, and I just want to let you know that I'm really interested in the job, and, you know, here's the most relevant of my work. Sometimes it's just like a mountain of resumes, and it's hard to kind of wade through, but if you can reach out and just ping them and make sure that they know you're interested, and highlight a specific piece of your experience that you want them to know about, that can certainly be helpful. I have seen people get hired onto a team just through online applications with not knowing anybody on the team. They didn't use any kind of networking really to get in there. But they were qualified, so they got the job. And I've seen other people who had the right network, they were even sometimes qualified and still didn't end up getting the job. So some of it can also be just kind of a numbers game, and it can be difficult sometimes. You don't always get every job that you might think you deserve. So there you go. It's good to apply to many positions. And many companies are just like not hiring for the role that you might want. So you have to be a little bit flexible and just try a lot and don't get discouraged. Question number 8. What are interviews like for positions in bioinformatics? So it varies a lot, sometimes even between interviewers at the same company, but you can expect some mix on the range of talking about your research. On the one hand, they might read your papers. They might say, hey, when you did this, why did you choose to do it that way instead of this other way? And it can be good, you know, for you to just like remind yourself about your own research, but that should be really easy for you to answer generally. Assuming that you have, you know, assuming you're ready for a thesis defense, you should also be ready for this. So on the other side, it is testing you on the skills that you claimed on your resume that are relevant to the job. Like if you say that you can code in Python, we might give you a coding problem in Python. I have also been tested on skills that were relevant to the job, but that weren't really on my resume, and skills that I maybe even didn't have. And, but at least in one case, even though I failed those horribly because I hadn't figured out algorithms interviews. I'd never done like whiteboard coding interviews before back then, and I had barely taken algorithms classes. But I still got a job offer just based on my research and software engineering work that I had done. So I'd say that's pretty rare, though. You don't want to fail your interviews. So do be ready for whiteboard coding interviews, even if you haven't claimed to be an algorithms expert. If you're going for a team that's a little bit more on the side of we make software, or variant callers, or assemblers, or aligners, or anything like that, absolutely be ready for whiteboard coding interviews. There's also kind of in between, more data science. Do you know what a p-value is? Like all sorts of different things that they can ask you that are fair game. From statistics you didn't use in your papers, and general coding things, general scientific topics that relate enough to your area of research that you should probably know about them too, can all come up. But I think generally it's more closer to one of these two camps of your research versus just whiteboard coding. Right, so another thing is the more scientific the role is, the more they'll dig into your research and might even make you present a paper that they choose for you, like do a really high-pressure journal club or something. Though I've mostly avoided those types of jobs myself since I'm more on the software engineering side. And so I've had to do a lot more whiteboard coding interviews to get my kinds of jobs. Okay. Question number 9. Looking back, what was the best thing you did when you began to search for your first job after your PhD? What would you do differently? This is a hard one to answer. So the best thing I did was that I had already produced lots of online evidence of my work. Several of my tools were web applications. In fact, I think technically all of them were web applications, and they were very visual. I'd even made videos for some of them. I had put all my code on GitHub. I had done a lot of these good things, and I had put effort into making great presentations that I presented at conferences over the course of a couple of years, which led to some good conversations and opportunities down the line. I also had established a niche specialty for myself in visualization. Making all the web apps, many of them were very data visualization focused. This happened naturally by following my own interests, but it definitely also helped me stand out, and it helped me land a job with a company that wasn't even looking to fill a particular role. They pretty much made a position for me and let me shape that position somewhat for myself and make it into, try to think, what impact do I want to have on this company and on its products? And I basically got to make some of those choices because I had set myself up to be more of an expert in visualization. So that really helped to, give me a way to stand out. I would say there isn't really anything that I would do differently around searching for my first job. Maybe I would apply to additional companies. I really only applied to 2. I basically just went through my contacts that I already had. I probably should have cast a wider net. It ended up turning out pretty well, though. Question number 10. So an undergraduate student asked this one: what criteria did you consider when you decided to pursue a PhD versus directly starting to work in industry after your graduation from your bachelors? Or what criteria do you suggest I look at? So for me, I was coming from biology in undergrad, so as far as I could tell at the time, I would have barely been able to land a lab tech job. In fact, a temp agency was the only one I really talked to, and they weren't interested in me because I didn't have cell culture experience, because that wasn't something we did very much at my school. And I didn't try very hard to try to find jobs. I basically was like, I should probably just apply to some schools, and if I don't get any of those, then I'll try to figure out what career I can make for myself in industry. But I certainly wasn't super excited about doing that just from biology. So getting a PhD or doing something else like a master's in computer science, or like doing a boot camp or something, just like become a software engineer, was maybe something else I should have considered, but didn't really know about the boot camps at the time. So I was basically trying to choose between a PhD in bioinformatics and like shifting fields entirely into computer science and just like getting a master's in that. And honestly, a big factor was that masters cost money and a PhD is free and they pay you. And also with a PhD, it sounds more fancy, and I'm using my biology knowledge I already had instead of just like giving it up completely and like admitting that I had chosen the wrong major and like going into computer science entirely, which didn't make me feel very good. And in retrospect, I am very happy that I went the PhD route and combined the biology with the computer science and got into this intersection of it, because it has been a lot more interesting. So if you are coming from a bioinformatics background though, let me tell you what I do know. So I know a few people who did a master's in bioinformatics right after undergrad, and they've been working in industry since then. Most of them do keep questioning if they should get a PhD someday. That probably happens because they're surrounded by PhDs, like half the teams they work with at least have PhDs. But so far, none of them have really gone back and done a PhD. And I suspect this is because they haven't actually really been blocked yet by needing a PhD. They haven't encountered the limitations, even though they kind of feel like there's somewhat of a glass ceiling that they can't get past. It hasn't bothered them enough that they're willing to go and get a PhD just to get that like higher level job. And in many cases, they end up being a little bit more like, oh, I'm going to like focus more on software and so on, where they don't need the PhD. They maybe don't want to run an entire research lab anyway, so they aren't super limited by this. I would say that if you do want to run a whole research lab and set the research direction for a group, then a PhD is probably a good fit. And I do have a video called Should You Do a PhD? So that contains a lot more information on that. In that one too, I think I tell the story of people I know in bioinformatics industry who went straight into that without a graduate degree, just from undergrad. And if you do have first author papers, or you've done an industry internship or something, it's certainly possible for you to go straight into bioinformatics industry, biotech industry, so on, without a graduate degree. But it is kind of rare, and you may continue to be seen as kind of the junior one for many years, potentially. Some of the people I know have in fact gone back to school and gotten a PhD or a master's. So there's a lot more to say about that. Again, it's in the Should You Do a PhD video. So that's basically all for the questions. I am thinking about doing another video just describing the decision of should you go into industry versus academia. So let me know in the comments if that's something that you would be really interested in, because then I can kind of push that up higher in my to-do list or make sure that I get it done. It's always good to see what people are interested in, because it's pretty motivating for me when I make videos. So yeah, let me know what kinds of things you want to see more of, and I'll sometimes try to make it happen. So that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching thus far. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, you can do that here. YouTube is recommending a video for you to watch here. And here's a video that I think you'll like based on this video. Good luck with the industry job hunt, everyone. I hope that it goes well. And feel free to leave comments on whatever you want. Additional questions, how it goes for you, all of that. All right, bye.